and that she think that it's Catherine haunting her from the grave. And of course, Scarlet's like, girl, what you said now? Okay, so this is going to be a recap of Scarlet and the Duke, season 1, episode 4. So Rupert arrives at Scarlet's house with the paper. Of course, Scarlet and Evie are excited to see if she's going to be mentioned because, of course, she played a huge role in the whole women's suffrage movement and the whole bomb and, you know, catching the culprit and that whole thing. So she's excited that she's going to be mentioned in this article. And, of course, that's going to bring more business. And then nothing. She was not mentioned in the article, and Duke got all of the praise and accolades. So, of course, you know, she is hot as fish grease, all right? And, of course, she's not going to let this go. No. So, we flash to the Duke, and he's meeting with Superintendent Sterling. I swear to God, the man that plays that character, which I should know by heart because I've seen a lot of his movies, he can't help but play an asshole in everything that he's in. And you know, he's also reading the paper. He's ecstatic about the glowing reviews on Duke's work and, you know, how he's being praised in this article. And the Duke said the article was also picked up in other publications. And Sterling is now telling Duke that a journalist is supposed to come to interview him about what he does and, you know, about how the department runs. And if he could just slip in how Superintendent Sterling is the backbone of the operation and how his leadership is what helps them to be so great, that would be greatly appreciated. And it would also help him in making a decision about this promotion that he's been dangling over his head for forever and a day now. So, of course, the Duke got back to his office, and who was there? Scarlet, hot as fish grease. She's upset that she wasn't mentioned in the article. And he basically told her that, you know, the next time that they, you know, have a case together, that he would make it a point to mention her. And, of course, she didn't hold out much, you know, hope that he would actually do that. And so she left quite upset. Around this time, Frank came in and told him that the journalist was there. So he's kind of prepping, trying to get ready to be interviewed by the journalist. So Scarlet is back at her office, and of course, just as she's about to walk in, Mr. Hildegard stops her, and he wants to basically talk her ear off. He's talking about how his niece is there visiting, and how he told her about, you know, this woman detective, and he said that maybe, you know, her being around a mature woman, which was kind of a dig at Scarlet's age. You should have seen her face when he said mature woman. And another thing, she was also offended when he said that maybe, you know, I told him that you would know about about fashion and gossip, because of course that's what women do. You sit around and talk about fashion and gossip. And Scarlet had to tell him, I am too busy working to gossip, so I really wouldn't be in the know about such things. And they eventually told her that he had a case for her, and it has to do with death photography. And so one of the photographers, I guess, that he works with, because Mr. Hildegard runs the funeral home, his name is, I know his last name is Henderson. And he's been receiving these photographs that's been altered that have these like faint images of his wife. And so once Scarlet dug a little deeper, he's saying that when it initially started, he decided he was going to destroy all of the negatives. And he thought that it, you know, that there's a message behind it, because the image that he's seeing, the faint image, is that of his dead wife. His wife died a year before, and he's trying to figure out like who would want to target him this way. Okay, so the Duke is now being interviewed by the journalist, and he just can't stop laying on compliment after compliment on how great he is and how touched he is that Duke is at the helm of keeping their city safe. And then the Duke slipped in, you know, if you could also mention about Superintendent Sterling, about, you know, his work behind the scenes, and, you know, what he does behind the scenes to keep our department running. And the journalist was like, oh, okay, so a little quid pro quo. So I understand, you know, we all have masters. And the Duke wasn't happy about that. But I mean, in all honesty, he's saying, you know, we all answer to someone. And he's saying that in order for me to do that, then he wanted the scoop on like some juicy story. And so the Duke was going through some of the cases that had recently come in, and basically there was nothing that he thought would wow his audience. And then this is creepy ass LinkedIn. He made the comment that death of the young and beautiful is what, you know, calls their readers to part from their coins to purchase their publication. So back at Scarlet's office, Mr. Hildegard came in because Scarlet needed a magnifying glass. So I guess she could, you know, examine the photos closer. And so he brought up a whole case of magnifying glasses, and, you know, she noticed that there was blood on the one of the photos and on the envelope. And of course, she was asking him how long has he known Henderson. He said that, you know, he's a great guy, wonderful guy, and he's worked with him for the past 10 years, and he can't think of anyone who would ever want to attack him or hurt him in this way, especially, you know, since, you know, his wife died. And this is when she found out through Mr. Hildegard that Henderson's wife actually committed suicide. And so shortly after that, a woman named Amelia Evans arrived, and she, you know, told Scarlet that she was hired as a governess, and eventually, you know, things progressed between her and Mr. Henderson, and that they are now engaged. And that she thinks that it's Catherine haunting her from the grave. And of course, Scarlet's like, girl, what you said now? So Scarlet is now meeting with the spiritualist, who we eventually find out is Edith Evans, Amelia's mother, who's claiming to have all this insight into everyone's dearly departed. And of course, Scarlet ain't buying it. She eventually asked Amelia if she could talk to her mom alone. And of course, Scarlet is like, why are you tormenting your daughter like this? You could see what it's doing to her. Why are you doing this? And then Edith goes into talking about Scarlet's father and how Scarlet had this pet frog, and how they did this experiment using chloroform, which they did in the previous episode. And she's making it seem like Scarlet's father is there telling her all this information. So we flash to the Duke and the journalist. They're at the morgue. He's examining this body. There's clearly a gunshot wound. I can't remember if it was in the guy's head or the chest. And he's explaining, going through like what could possibly happen. He can clearly see that the journalist is not at all interested, and he's asking him like, okay, so what more are you looking for? And he's looking for something gruesome and terrible. And so the Duke is like, well, this is just the, you know, preliminary. We don't know. We still have to actually investigate, go into the backgrounds, the people involved. And so things could pick up. But then around this time, Frank comes in and basically says that, okay, the case has been solved. It was a dispute between him and his business partner, and his business partner shot him. So around this time, the medical examiner, he walked in and he was so frustrated, talking about how this woman is getting on his nerves, how he's so frustrated, and you need to go out and talk to her, and it's Scarlet. And of course the journalist is like, who is Scarlet? So before they can say anything, the dude said, she's my cousin. She's very boring and unassuming, and, you know, not even worth writing about. And so of course he left to go and talk to her. And so she wanted to talk to him because she wanted some background information on Edith Evans. And he was kind of short and curt with her, and basically he couldn't do it right then. And of course, the whole point of he's really trying to keep her away from this journalist, right? And so he wouldn't let her go in, and he ends up calling Frank to help her. And she's like, well, wait a minute. Frank dislikes me even more than you do, or, you know, something to that effect. And he's basically saying he can't, he's busy right now. He ends up sending Frank to help her pull whatever files they can find on convictions on Edith Evans. So they're back at the police station. She's gone through all the convictions, and there were no convictions on Edith Evans. She wanted to see some other criminal files. Frank was like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And of course, she's upset. She was like, wait a minute, William, which is said that you would be helpful, and he said, I did. You know, I got the convictions, and said, you know, you haven't found what you're looking for, so it's time for you to go. And then she tried to use her feminine wiles on him about how he, you know, you don't have to take orders, how you can make up your own mind, and he wasn't going for that. He basically was like, bye bye. And so of course she left upset. So Scarlet is back at the Henderson's house, and Mr. Henderson apologized for not telling her about the engagement. And she asked him, like, who else before, because he, like I said previously, he destroyed the negatives. So she was trying to figure out, okay, well, who else would have had access to the negatives before you destroyed them? And he said Amelia, but he's sure that she wouldn't have anything to do with this. And then he told her that he was going out of town for to take care of some business, and he wanted to know if she would stay at the house with Amelia because she hates being in the house alone. And he's afraid that, you know, she's kind of losing her mind like Catherine did, and he's afraid that something might happen if she's left alone. So, grudgingly, Scarlet agreed to stay with her. So later that night, Amelia is showing her to the guest room, and of course the maid is coming in to drop off the sheets and blankets and the whole thing. And they talked a little bit, and she, you know, basically Scarlet is basically telling her that she really, you know, she's a skeptic. She don't believe in any of this stuff. And Amelia was like, well, you know, we'll see after you spend one night in this room, because this was Catherine's room. This is actually the room she died in. You should have seen Scarlet's face, like, girl, what? Why you got me up in here? So later that night, Duke and Frank are at the bar, saloon, wherever they are, having drinks. And Duke is talking about the journalist and how the journalist wants, you know, this sensational story. And of course he told him about what Superintendent Sterling wanted him to say. And Frank is like, you know, basically it's a joke. That man don't really do anything, really. And then he started asking him about Scarlet, and he's telling him how annoying Scarlet is and why does he put up with it. And then he started, you know, to go into some like inappropriate comments. And Duke basically told him if he said anything else about Scarlet, that he would knock him through the wall. And he told him that her father couldn't have done enough for him. And he's known Scarlet since they were young. And, you know, he wasn't doing it. He wasn't going to sit up and let him talk about her and question her, his motives, and, you know, make comments like that about Scarlet. He just wasn't doing it. Even though she drive him crazy, he ain't going there with you. And then, you know, Frank started going in about the story about, you know, the ghost and photography and death photography and the whole thing. And you can kind of see it sparked an interest in the Duke. Like, maybe this might be a case that might get the journalist's attention, right? So we're back at the Henderson's house. Scarlet is getting ready for bed. Next thing you know, she hears some screaming and crying. She went into Amelia's room and she had a nightmare. Scarlet kind of put her at ease, and she seemed like she was okay and ready to go to bed. And as soon as she moved the cover, she found another envelope. So the next morning, Scarlet is kind of looking at the window, and, you know, she did have the window open that night, and it was raining, and then she was asking her about the door, and Amelia was sure that she had locked the door the night before. And of course Scarlet asked her, okay, well, who else has a key? And she told her the maid. So Scarlet started following the maid, and the maid ended up going into the place where she sent a telegram. So Scarlet ends up going in, and she, you know, was telling the guy that her friend sent the telegram, and, you know, some things may have changed, and she wanted to make sure that she sent the right information. They were supposed to be meeting someone for dinner. She wanted to make sure they sent the right address to the place, and, you know, basically wanted to double check. The guy wasn't budging. He was like, well, we have a sign here. It was a sign that basically saying that, you know, the messages are confidential. And then she tried to say, oh, she's a detective. And of course he's like, you're a what? And then she saw Duke. And so she went out there and spoke to him. And it's like, asked him what he was, you know, why was he in that area? And then she realized that he was following her. And he started telling her how, you know, he's shown renewed interest in the Henderson case. And she's trying to figure out, okay, so why are you doing that now? Why did you, why are you getting involved now? And he's saying it's on, you know, it's just a case that's on their books that you're trying to close out. And maybe we could compare notes. And so she asked him about, you know, what he knew. And she was able to deduce not much. And then he was like, well, I only just got the case, so I don't know a whole lot. But I'm trying to basically get this message. So the next thing you know, he's in there yelling at this child that held behind the counter, basically telling him if he didn't give him that message that she was going to do ... to him. And this child is basically cowering, crying, tears flowing down his little face. And then he went in the back to get the message. And Scarlet was like, he's only a kid. And the dude was like, well, you told me to scare him. I'm like, Lord, these people are so crazy. So he came out with the message. He basically said that the message was already sent, but so I don't know what was said, but I do know who it was sent to. And that's when they realized that the message was sent to Edith Evans, Amelia's mother. So they're now sitting down with Edith, and she, of course, reiterates that she had nothing to do with the images. While they were searching her house, Scarlet found all of this information. She's had a lot of people working with her, feeding her information. That's how, she's been able to grift people and, into believing that she's actually speaking with their loved ones. And they actually found the information that she had on Scarlet, talking about the frog and the whole thing. So that's how she knew about Scarlet. And so she basically said that she was not a fan of her marrying, getting involved with Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson is 20 years her senior. And, she wasn't happy about it. So, but, she admitted to encouraging the idea that Amelia was being haunted by Catherine from the grave, but she had nothing to do with it. Her whole thing was, I guess she thought that if she scared Amelia enough, that she would leave Mr. Henderson. So in the end, they eventually end up taking her to jail. And while they were finishing up, Frank walked in. He didn't realize that Scarlet was there. Frank walked in and he was telling her how the journalist is waiting to talk to you about the case or something to that effect. And then he had to notify him. Then he ends up like making the facial expression that, Scarlet is there. So he looked over and he realized that he kind of messed up by saying something. So he left. And of course she's confronting him about the journalist. And of course, Scarlet is like, okay, so you're going to take all the credit again. And so he ends up saying that he's trying to move up and there are army people ahead of him. And this is, I guess, is going to get him, he's working to get this promotion. Okay, so Scarlet ends up saying, oh, are you experiencing prejudice in your career? Huh, imagine that. And now, so now you understand where she's coming from? Okay. So, Scarlet went back to the Hendersons to give them an update. So she's sitting out in the foyer and she could hear Mr. Henderson and Amelia arguing. Amelia ends up storming out of I guess that was the sitting room. And Scarlet gives him an update, Mr. Henderson, an update on how they arrested Edith for fraud or, and for suspicion of sending those photos. And he's saying, well, she didn't do it. And of course, she asked him how he know that. And he's saying that they received, when he came home not 10 minutes ago, that there was another envelope on the doorstep. And so she went up to talk to Amelia while Amelia was packing. And Amelia was upset because she felt like Mr. Henderson wasn't on her side, that he wasn't believing her, and how she's going to go and stay with her sister. And she even said, or I guess he hinted that maybe, that she had something to do with it. And when she looked at Scarlet she didn't say anything, but her facial expression was like, do you? I had the same question. And then she went off on some, this is Amelia talking about, I want to be married, I want to have kids, and just because you don't doesn't give you the right to project that onto everyone else. And she stormed out. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? What was that about? Okay, anywho. So Scarlet went in search of Mr. Henderson, but she ended up finding Violet, his daughter. And so she is playing with her dolls, and she's like posing them, I guess, like they would do during the photographing the dead, which I've always thought was macabre. And she ends up pricking her finger and putting blood on the doll to add some, I guess, some redness to the face. And then Scarlet flashed back to when she saw like that drop of blood in the corner of one of the photos and on the envelope. And then she asked Violet, where are the rest of the negatives? And Violet was like, well, she told me not to say. And she was like, who? And her mom. And so that's when it all came out. And Scarlet is now talking to Mr. Henderson again. Catherine knew about the affair, and this was her way of getting revenge. She set this up as a game for Violet, how Violet's supposed to leave these envelopes. Now, she never knew what was in the envelopes, which I can't imagine. They said that in the show, but at the same time, she did find blood on one of the photos, so she had to have opened at least one of them. Anyway, but this was all a revenge to create problems between Mr. Henderson and Amelia because she knew he was having an affair. So Scarlet is now at home. Rupert is there. They're just lounging around, kicking it, just having a conversation. And then, of course, the question came about his mom. She asked how his mother was doing. And he talked about how she's still pushing him to get married. And then he jokingly, but I guess he was kind of serious, saying that maybe we can come to an arrangement. And Scarlet was like, I think that we would make each other miserable. And he was like, oh, wouldn't have to be intimate. It wouldn't have to be anything like that. Something to that effect. And it made her chuckle. It's like, okay, who's about to get married to not have sex with their partner? Anywho, I know it happens, but Scarlet ain't the one for that. And so they both just kind of looked at each other and kind of laughed. So the Duke is now meeting with Sterling, and he's telling him about the article, how the article is about to go to press, and how he gave Sterling glowing reviews. And then, he thanked him for his new work on the article. And then, of course, he was standing there waiting for him to say something else. And Sterling was like, was there something else? He was like, well, yeah, you said that you would speak to the higher-ups about me getting a promotion. And then he says to him, oh, didn't I speak to you about this earlier? And Duke was like, well, no, if you had, I would remember that conversation. And then he ends up saying, well, I gave the job to Hudson. And Duke was like, wait a minute, Hudson has only been here 3 months. And he was like, oh, but he spent 5 years in the Army. And then he goes to the background of how Sterling, actually served with Hudson's father. And basically, Duke was passed over yet again. So again, Scarlet is going to her office. Mr. Hildegard couldn't wait to stop her. And they talked for a little bit, and she was like, and he, told her that, your friend was such a nice guy, and he's on his way to take us to the park, and we're going to spend the day out. And she was like, my friend? And it was Rupert. So what I gather from that whole scenario is that Rupert is going to try to woo Mrs. Hildegard, the niece, into marrying him. One, to get his mother off his back. I guess to possibly give her what she wants, which is an heir. And still have his life on the side, which I think is shitty. But that's what I think is about to go down. So Scarlet makes her way into the office, and she saw that the door was open and the Duke was there, and she was trying to figure out, like, how did you get in? And so the whole conversation about the key, her father had given him a key. Oh, I just kicked the camera. Her father had given him a key because her father was always losing stuff. And he always, wanted someone to have an extra key. And I thought that was funny because it seemed like every time he turned around, she's sitting in his office. So I thought, okay, that was funny. And so, he apologized for what happened. And then he showed her the paper, that morning paper. And it mentioned the female detective and her address and, the person who helped him on the case. And he said he caught them just before it went to press. And of course, she was ecstatic. And, he did right. He did right by her this time. He did tell her previously that the next time they worked together, he would mention it. But if things had gone his way, do you think that he would have mentioned her in that paper? I don't know. I doubt it. But anyway, he did. And so she's, she got what she wanted. So hopefully this will drum up more business for her. So the last scene was her. There's this photo of her and her dad. And earlier in the episode, it was crooked and she went to kind of straighten it. And so now in this scene, it's crooked again. And she's trying to figure out, like, why is this thing always kind of tilted? So she went to straighten the photo and eventually it just fell off the wall. And now you see this big hole in the wall. And she's now found, I guess would be her dad's notebook. And we're not sure at this point what you saw, but she's now staring with her eyes all bugged out like she done seen something. So I guess we'll find out in the next episode. And so that's how this episode ends. I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.